If you approached Crab Hill in Chester County, Pennsylvania, in the early 1900s, you might think you were looking at a prestigious university. The stately red brick buildings, covered walkways, and manicured lawns projected an image of absolute tranquility. But this sprawling village had a specific purpose: the total removal of disabled Americans from society. This was Pennhurst State School and Hospital. The facility was funded by state taxpayers who were told they were paying for a progressive, humane refuge for those the outside world had turned away. The collegiate architecture acted as a mask for a system of total isolation. At Pennhurst, the very design of the campus helped the public look away. To understand how Pennhurst was funded, you have to look at the pseudoscience that gripped universities, medical journals, and government offices at the turn of the 20th century: eugenics. The men promoting this theory believed that traits like poverty, intellectual disability, and epilepsy were genetic curses. They warned that if the people carrying these traits were allowed to multiply, they would weaken the nation. These warnings were championed by respected mainstream medical professionals. When these doctors brought their fears to the Pennsylvania legislature, lawmakers responded with a policy of permanent containment. They passed an act authorizing what they called a perpetual quarantine, prioritizing lifelong isolation over medical treatment. Pennhurst was a state-mandated blueprint for human segregation. The system was functioning exactly as designed. For decades, the public saw a curated version of the institution. On visiting days, guests were treated to performances by resident marching bands and choral societies to project an image of an enriching, therapeutic environment. The internal reality was a machine that erased individuality. The intake process immediately reduced complex human beings to logistical burdens. Administrators sorted residents using rigid, unscientific categories. People were placed in boxes labeled imbecile or insane, labels ignoring their individual humanity. As courts and orphanages funneled more people through these gates, the physical campus collapsed. The population swelled to over 3,500 people, turning a design meant for small cottage living into a massively underfunded warehouse. Rooms originally built for a handful of beds were packed with dozens of residents. These metal-framed bunks represent a scale of overcrowding that left thousands of people without any individual care or personal space. By the 1960s, Pennhurst functioned as an industrial holding pen. Safety and treatment had been replaced by the management of human inventory. State officials successfully kept these conditions hidden for 60 years. That secrecy held until the fall of 1968, when a local television reporter named Bill Baldini was granted rare, unrestricted access to the wards. Baldini bypassed the curated tours, capturing raw, unfiltered footage of exhausted, overworked staff managing severely overcrowded rooms where residents sat entirely alone, devoid of stimulation or dignity. The 5-night broadcast provoked a visceral reaction across the region. Taxpayers realized their public money was funding a human rights emergency playing out less than an hour from their own homes. For the families of residents, this footage provided undeniable public proof. State officials could no longer ignore the pleas they had brushed aside for decades. The broadcast reframed the institution as the primary danger. Viewers now saw the facility's unchecked power as the true threat to dignity and safety. The legal reckoning began in 1974 after an ordinary visit home. Another discovered unexplained bruises on her daughter, Terry Lee Halderman, raising immediate questions about the conditions back at the institution. Terry Lee's family responded by filing a lawsuit. Their act of defiance grew into a federal class action case representing every resident living behind the gates. The case, Halderman versus Pennhurst, made a bold legal claim. It argued that disabled citizens in state custody possessed a constitutional right to appropriate care and community inclusion. In 1977, a federal judge delivered his verdict. He ruled that the conditions at Pennhurst directly violated the Constitution, declaring that the practices inside amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. This ruling marked a significant shift. The American legal system now recognized disabled individuals as a class of human beings possessing fundamental civil rights. Following the ruling, the state began a 9-year transition process. More than 1,000 residents were moved out of institutional life and into community-based care, before Pennhurst finally closed its doors in 1987. Today, the physical campus sits mostly abandoned. Buildings that once warehoused thousands are crumbling into the countryside, with portions of the property utilized as a seasonal haunted house attraction. But the true weight of Pennhurst is found in what it dismantled. The legal precedents forged here fueled a national movement toward deinstitutionalization and laid the direct framework for the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. The struggles of the Pennhurst residents catalyzed a nationwide activism. The disabled community mobilized, becoming visible political advocates for their own liberation. Pennhurst's ultimate legacy was the exposure of the people it was built to hide. This forced recognition secured a permanent right for disabled citizens to live and belong within their own communities.